Chapter 13. Troll Hunting. The wound was deep, but not life-threatening. A spear had struck Spirion in the side of the head, thrown by an invisible hand from out of the fog, and skipped off his skull. Sidra did a masterful job of sewing his scalp back together, and the wizard now sat on a moss-covered rock, fuming.
"I am as helpless as a lamb," he complained. "I cannot even heal myself properly."
It was past midday, and still there had been no decision made on how they would proceed.
"The trolls are throwing logs at the main gates, 10 of the monstrous brutes to a pole, hurling them in unison like great blunt-headed spears. The effect is devastating when they hit."
Another crash sounded as if to emphasize his point.
"I would not be surprised if they were inside the city soon, while we sit here like sheep waiting for the farmer to finish butchering his pigs before he comes for us. I have never heard of so many banding together. It is impossible to get an exact count with this blasted fog covering everything. I might have enough strength to lift it. It would take only the smallest amount of wind, and then the soldiers could see where to aim at least. But that would reveal us in the process."
"Maybe we can use the fog to our advantage," Sidra suggested. "We could try to slip into the city through a side gate."
"I thought of that, but the archers are shooting at anything that moves. It is likely that they would make pincushions of us before they realized we meant them no harm. If only I had my strength back, I would scatter these pathetic vermin to the winds."
He sighed.
"Alamon shouldered more of the load of holding the split open than any of us. For some reason, he has quite unexpectedly relinquished that duty. I am very concerned about what that might mean. The logical conclusion, of course, is that he—"
Jaden and Sidra shared a nervous look, but did not mention Quandus's earlier pronouncement.
"I will not believe he is no longer with us until I see proof, but for now we must proceed as if we are completely without his guidance."
Jaden wished, not for the first time, that his father was there. He would know what to do. Trolls feared the king like they feared death itself. It was said that a troll would run at the very mention of Urian's name. A plan began to form in his mind. It would be dangerous, maybe even reckless, but he had not come all this way to run from his enemies. He would not leave Mora to the trolls now, just as he would not leave Crysin to Grisland. It was time to make a stand. He removed the clothes that Spirion had brought for him from Zadosha's saddlebags, sparing a comforting pat for the big warhorse. There were black leather boots with carved silver buckles, and white silk pants with a matching shirt. Along with the outfit was a banner, which he unrolled. The crest of the Ryanthorn coat of arms was unmistakable, a 6-pointed reddish-gold crown with orange flames at the tips against a snow-white background. It was perfect. The ancient symbol would be like a beacon of doom to the trolls. With Spirion's help, some theatrics, a pole cut from a nearby sapling, and a little luck, the very sight of the famous mark would at least stall the enemy long enough for the defenders of Mora to open the gates for them. That was the general idea, anyway. He noticed the others staring at him.
"What are you thinking, boy? You had that same wild look in your eyes when you jumped on the back of Zadosh. Zadosh is a horse. This is an army of trolls. What exactly are you planning?"
"A diversion. We just need long enough to get through the gates. I know we can do that much. We must try." Spirion tapped his cheek thoughtfully.
"What do you need from me?"
And so it was a short time later, after a steady barrage of protests from Quandus, Jaden made his way onto the fog-covered field astride the impressive Facilian warhorse, midway between the besieged town of Mora and the invading army of trolls, dressed like a king, with Quandus displaying the Ryanthorn banner proudly from Maggie's saddle. His companions huddled around the black warhorse, doing their best to appear unafraid. Sidra had her bow at the ready and a determined set to her jaw. The chanting grew louder the further they went, clearer. It was a single word repeated over and over. Jaden strained his ears to try and decipher it. Dermon? Dermog? Dergmont. Spirion raised his hands in the air. Nothing happened at first. Then, just as Jaden was about to ask the wizard if something was amiss, he felt a slight breeze against his cheek. The breeze picked up swiftly until the fog within the field began to swirl. A large patch was soon cleared, a pocket of perfect clarity within the cloudy white sea revealing the trolls, the front of the castle, and the newcomers. There was one last thud as a giant tree trunk landed harmlessly in the dirt next to a pile of similar logs that had missed their mark at the gate, and the endless chanting that had persisted since their arrival became a scattered chorus of lone voices before ceasing altogether. The uneven ranks of the troll army stared in disbelief as Jaden stood up in his stirrups, the ancient symbol of the Ryanthorns revealed beside him in all its glory. He spoke in a tone as deep and commanding as he could muster, and the sound of his voice, amplified by Spirion, was carried outward toward the thoroughly surprised trolls, as well as into the city, he hoped. "You have violated treaties laid down by Vendemos, governor of the eastern province of Crysin, with the power vested in him by Urian Ryanthorn, king of Crysin. This will not stand. Throw down your arms and retreat to neutral territory, and you will be spared. Persist, and you will be destroyed." Dead silence permeated the field as the trolls looked to one another in confusion. Then a monstrous mountain troll with a horned helm stepped forward. Even from a distance, he was easily the biggest troll that Jaden had ever seen, standing head and shoulders above the other mountain trolls scattered throughout the enemy ranks, which were made up predominantly of the smaller wood trolls. The giant stared defiantly, his eyes locked on to Jaden's.
"Durgmont fear no Demos," the troll bellowed. "Durgmont fear no king. Durgmont will eat you, little man."
The enormous leader of the troll army took a menacing step forward, giving courage to the other trolls, who began to follow. Jaden suddenly felt more than a little vulnerable, and moderately foolish, standing in his gleaming white shirt in the middle of the open field. He spared a quick glance toward the walled city. The defenders were visible in great numbers, spaced evenly around the top of the massive wall of perfectly fitted stone, watching. The front gates had not moved. What are they waiting for? Breathing deep against the rising fear, he turned his gaze back on the sea of misshapen faces that belonged to the army now bent on smashing him and his 5 companions into oblivion. "Open your hand," said Spirion in a strained voice. The effort of holding back the fog was obviously wearing on him. "Hold it to the sky." Jaden did as he was told, and a small ball of flame immediately burst to life above his open palm, surprising him as much as anybody. It quickly began to grow, pulsating like a thing alive, and roiling with an inner fury. The advancing trolls halted.
"When you are ready, throw your hand forward at the big one. Soon would be preferable."
Jaden nodded. "If Durgmont will not be gone," he yelled as menacingly as he could, "then Durgmont will perish." Then he flung out his hand, just as Spirion had instructed. The flaming ball streaked through the air with a howl, seeming to grow larger as it went. It struck the bewildered troll leader squarely, knocking him back among his underlings and scattering the screaming forms of those nearby. When the initial chaos ended, Durgmont was nowhere in sight, and a scattering of trolls lay writhing in pain on the damp ground. Tendrils of smoke rose from their charred bodies, the gruesome sound of sizzling flesh audible in the abrupt silence. Time seemed to crawl as Jaden stood his mount, doing his best to stare down the suddenly tentative mass of trolls. Finally, a volley of arrows rained down on the now perfectly visible invaders, and a clear note blown on a bugle rang crisply through the midday air, accompanied by the sound of groaning timbers as what was left of the gates of Mora swung slowly outward. The great doors stalled as they met with the debris from the assault, including whole trunks of trees, many with their limbs still attached. After much rolling and shifting, a space was cleared, and mounted soldiers with spears poured forth onto the field, shouting wildly. The front lines of the troll army began to waver in spots, and then broke altogether as the enemy turned and ran for the cover of the woods. With an exhilarating thrill coursing through him, Jaden imagined himself harrying the trolls from behind, hacking tendons and necks with his scimitar to make them pay for their unwarranted aggression. letting them know that attacking his people would not be tolerated. Mora's troops were almost to them. It would be such an easy thing to raise his sword, turn, and lead the charge. His sword was in his hand, though he did not remember drawing it.
"Oi,"
said Quandus, breaking him out of his spell.
"the gates are open. Unless you plan to lead an exhausted wizard, 3 children, and an old man against an army of trolls, I suggest we enter the city now."
He noticed then that Sidra was helping support Spirion, who looked to be barely conscious, and the Droka were huddled together, staring at him with a mix of fear and awe. Their looks caught him off guard. He wanted to explain to them that it was not he who had made the fire, but Quandus was right. They should move. This was no time to try and struggle through the language barrier. "Of course," he replied. He sheathed the foreign blade back into the Droka sash he still wore and turned Zadosh, kicking him lightly into motion. The stallion wanted to run, and with so much adrenaline coursing through him, Jaden wanted to let him, but he forced himself to keep the horse at a walk so as not to outdistance the others. From the corner of his eye, he noticed that Sidra was grinning. He laughed in spite of himself, flashing her a sheepish smile. They were alive, and it felt wonderful. Mora's cavalry surrounded them with triumphant shouts and cheers, the soldiers raising their weapons to the sky in triumph. The greeting was more than he could have hoped for. Finally, he had reached his people. Jaden responded to the cheers with casual nods and a steady smile. His smile turned to a frown, however, as he noticed something odd. The faces surrounding him were not those he expected to see. These were not soldiers in their prime, but youths, old men and old women who had ridden out to meet them. Something was wrong. The fog closed in again as they approached the gates, the walled city looming intimidating before them. He had been inside those great gray walls on 3 separate visits, and remembered his amazement each time at how solidly the place was constructed. The walls were incredibly thick, nearly 10 feet of cut granite taken from quarries at the base of the Crystal Mountains, and over 50 cubits high. Stone barracks, with roofs that slanted down from the inner face of the wall, lined the base of the massive structure all the way around to the back, where the wall sat atop a sheer cliff face that plummeted down hundreds more feet to the lake. The circumference of the wall formed an enormous half-oval, with a cleared cobblestone courtyard separating the barracks from the squat stone shops and houses of the city within. A group of pikemen waited on either side of the entrance, ushering them through with urgent gestures. Jaden did not see what the hurry was for, since it would take time for the trolls to regroup if they chose to mount another offensive. He stubbornly held his pace, despite a few scowls. The gates closed directly on their heels, with a loud boom. Another small party was waiting for them in the courtyard, but Governor Deimos was nowhere in sight. Instead, a stout young man stepped forward to greet them. Jaden eyed him curiously. Garad? He had never gotten along well with Torvin's grandson. On their most recent meeting, they had crossed wooden practice swords to the delight of a crowd of family and veteran soldiers. Jaden had beaten Garad handily, but he remembered the youth fighting with an overabundance of emotion. After losing the fight, Garad attacked Jaden with his fists. General Eckenroy eventually stepped in and pulled them apart. The slightly younger boy had grown considerably since then. Jaden recognized only a handful of the 30 or so men that accompanied him, respected veterans who had served under Torvin and chosen to follow him to his post in the east. Foremost among them was Zurith Poole, Torvin's right hand. Garad did not waste time with pleasantries. "Where is Urien?" he asked bluntly. Poole should be speaking for Mora, thought Jaden, not this boy. "Where is your grandfather?" he replied evenly. "Torvin is dead," Garad informed him. "He was killed by the Troll King, Durgmont." Spirion chuckled, gaining a hard stare. "Do you find something funny about my grandfather's death, sir?" "Not at all, boy. I am sorry for your loss. But trolls have no kings. Brutes will rise up and are followed out of fear, not loyalty. Their very nature makes the concept of a kingdom impossible.
As soon as they are out of sight of their oppressors, they follow their own twisted instincts, not orders."
Garrod eyed him shrewdly.
"And who are you, to presume to know more about trolls than a man of Mora?"
"I am Spirion," the wizard replied, as if the answer should have been obvious. Eyes widened at the name, especially among the older men.
"Ah,"
Garrod responded, clearly unimpressed.
"We all saw the little fireworks display. That was your doing, then?"
Spirion sputtered with indignation at the insult.
"A pretty trick, but not enough to hurt them. They will be back."
"We were not trying to hurt them," Jaden replied wearily. He was quickly tiring of Garrod's attitude. "We were trying to make it inside the city alive. And to answer your earlier question, my father, your king, is also dead." A collective gasp ran through the group.
"I am sorry, Your Highness," said Zurith. "We had heard rumors that things were bad in Eridan, and that the royal family was nowhere to be found. This is a dark day for us all. Couriers will be sent through the city to proclaim a day of mourning for our king."
"I thank you, Zurith."
"And the queen?"
Jaden looked him soberly in the eye. Zurith bowed his head.
"A dark day indeed."
"Grisland stabbed my father in the back, and is also responsible for my mother's death." He paused to let the implications of his words sink in. Their expressions were as incredulous as his own would have been. "The wizard betrayed us all, and the city is now under his control. He has become frighteningly powerful. You can imagine the need to strike quickly, to move against the betrayer. I am eager to regain stability in the kingdom."
"I am sure you are,"
Garrod replied with a sadistic smile, cutting off a reply from Poole.
"But where will you find the soldiers to accompany you on such a dangerous quest?"
Zurith Poole turned a sharp look to Garrod, who ignored it. The boy obviously felt that he oversaw the city now, and the aged soldier had said nothing to contradict it. That put Jaden in a bind. He had to have accurate information about the state of Mora's military and what was needed to keep the city safe to know what he could take from her garrison. If Garrod would not cooperate, there was no telling how long it would take to get an honest assessment of the situation. There was simply no time for any of this. The longer he toiled in Mora, the longer Crysin remained in turmoil. He decided to try a direct approach. "We have never been friends," he acknowledged to Garrod, matching the other's bluntness. "But your friendship is not what I seek. I need to know what the city can spare."
"Spare? Mora is besieged by the Troll King, Your Highness. Despite what your knowledgeable friend the magician says, I assure you that this threat is quite real."
Jaden raised a hand to halt Spirion's response. He did not want to cause a scene in the courtyard unless he had to, and the wizard had a way of talking down to people that was sure to add fuel to the fire in this suddenly volatile situation. It might come to force in the end, but he would at least give Garrod a chance to be sensible.
"The Troll King you speak of is dead,"
said Jaden evenly. "You saw him incinerated with your own eyes."
"I saw a wizard's trick,"
replied Garrod ferociously, the force of his words causing him to spit. Being well acquainted with the young man's temper, Jaden was not at all taken aback by his sudden vehemence. Garrod stepped forward until his face was inches away, speaking with great conviction.
"I make it no secret that I do not like you. I think you are a pompous child who has been pampered his entire life. We men of the East are not as soft as you Northerners. It is we who have kept your precious kingdom safe for hundreds of years. It is we who have shed our blood against the monsters in the forest. My own father gave his life for your father's kingdom at the split, and now my grandfather has too, fighting this demon that resides in the crystal. Dergmont is not as easily slain as you pretend. The trolls have magic of their own."
Garrod lifted his head to the battered gates, a haunted look in his eyes.
"These truly are dark times. Strange things roam the woods, and not only during the night. The minions of the enemy grow bold."
He lifted his gaze to the top of the wall, glancing from tower to tower like a man who saw beasts in the shadows.
"My best troops patrol these walls, maintaining a constant vigil. I cannot spare one of them for your cause, Prince, and that is the truth. He is not of this world, this devil, Dergmont. He is out there still, planning his revenge on my city. I know it. I can feel him." We all can.
Jaden was mystified by Garod's genuine fear. The trolls were a threat, but Mora was a large city with a reputed might of its own. To cower behind the walls and allow a weaker enemy to pen them in was lunacy. Any tactician knew that. Had Garod sent old men, women, and children out to meet them because his best troops were on the walls, shooting at shadows? There was no doubt that he believed what he was saying, but why would Zurith Pool let this stand? The old veteran had to know the consequences of succumbing to an unsubstantiated fear. Citizens of the recently besieged city had begun to emerge from doors and alleys to crowd around them in a semicircle. The gaunt, drawn, dirt-covered faces of the poor and hungry were everywhere. Things were bad here. The condition of Mora's people made Jaden wonder if shipments had been coming in and out of the city, or had Garod let his fear grow to the point where he had shut them off from the outside world. Were the hungry faces that surrounded them in increasing numbers merely curious citizens, or were they looking for salvation? It was hard to fathom how the people of the East, reputed to be the hardest in the land, could reduce themselves to the level of frightened rabbits hiding in their holes. He had seen enough. The city was too important to Crysin to let it rot like a festering wound until it destroyed itself, weakening what was left of the kingdom in the process. If these people needed a savior, then he would give them one. He would denounce Garod and appeal to the soldiers and to the people themselves. Everywhere he looked, he saw fear and despair. He had made it this far, but had he arrived in time? If he was going to act, it had to be now, before Garod had time to move against him. This was the most vulnerable that the young man would be, here in the open square with only his personal guard, advisors, and the people of Mora watching. Jaden would ask publicly that Garod turn control of the city over to him. If he would not, which was likely, he would challenge him to a duel. Garod could not refuse such a challenge in front of everyone, especially from the Prince of Crysin. The army, and even the citizens of Mora, would never accept a coward for their leader. Anyone knew that much about Easterners. Garod was staring at him expectantly, his expression a mix of paranoia and open hatred. Looking into the young man's crazed eyes, Jaden made up his mind. There would be no reasoning with him. He cleared his throat to address the people. As he did, a wiry hand shot out and clasped his wrist in an iron grip, stopping him. He turned in surprise to see that it was Quandus who had grabbed him. The old man was stronger than he looked. Jaden raised a questioning eyebrow to the man Spirion had named the prophet, but Quandus was not looking at him. In fact, he was not looking at anyone. He was staring at nothing, his breathing elevated almost to the point of panting. The old man licked his lips.
He is right. The Troll King must be destroyed, or Mora will fall. It must be now, while he is weak. Only his head will suffice.
Jaden did not know what to say.
You travel in strange company these days, Prince, remarked Garod. Who is your ancient, morbid friend?
He is the prophet, Spirion interjected sternly, and you will address him with respect.
Wizards and prophets and lost princes, said Garod with amusement, seeking out the faces of some of his younger companions. We are saved. His words were met with nervous laughter that quickly died. And what are these fairy tale creatures? The Droka had become the subject of several curious stares. Friends, Jaden replied absently. Quandus's words troubled him. If what he said were true, it might explain the situation in Mora, and why Zurith Pool was strangely silent. Cedra trusted her grandfather, and Spirion seemed to think he was much more than an aged historian, so it would be foolish to disregard him. But what sort of creature could withstand such a blast? If Dergmont's burnt corpse was the only thing that would appease them, he would retrieve it. It would not be a pleasant task, but what options did he have now that a member of his own company had proclaimed that the troll leader was still alive? At least now I do not have to challenge Garod, he thought, trying to find some good in the situation. The last thing he wanted to do was kill the grandson of one of the kingdom's greatest heroes. Winning Mora over was not proving to be such a simple thing. Of course, nothing had been simple for some time now. He looked over the dirty faces surrounding them. Some of them stared blankly, others with a faint expression of hope. "Lend me a small detachment of soldiers," he said, resigning himself to the gruesome task. "I will bring you Dergmont's head. Perhaps then life in this city can get back to normal." "I already told you that I can spare no soldiers," replied Garrod. "That is final." Jaden could not believe what he was hearing. "I'm not asking for half the garrison, only a small party of brave soldiers to accompany me in this task. Surely there are brave soldiers left in Mora." He looked from face to face among Garrod's companions. Most of the older men lowered their eyes uncomfortably, not willing to meet their prince's challenging stare. Some of the younger ones mirrored their young leader's look of defiance. Finally, Zurith Pool spoke up.
"I will go with you."
Garrod shot a contemptuous look at the aging soldier. "So be it," he said with an uncaring shrug. "You were a true friend to my father and my grandfather. We will mourn your passing. Open the gates," he ordered. "If they return, let them in, but I would not expect it." With a final glare, he motioned the remainder of his men away. Jaden clasped Zurith on the shoulder. "I do not pretend to know what brought the city to its present state, but I promise you that I will do everything in my power to return things to normal."
"I know you will, Highness. I knew your father well. You have always reminded me of him."
Jaden wanted to say more, but the gates opening stole his attention away. He turned to address his companions. "This should not take long," he said. "I am sure there is a suitable inn somewhere. Since Mora's ruler did not offer us his hospitality, I will look for you there when we return." Sidra laughed. "Did I say something funny?" "You can look anywhere you like, Prince, but we will be by your side." Spirion nodded. Quandus was still staring at nothing, his eyes glazed over. The Droka were looking around the city with wonder, sticking close to one another. "It is no use arguing," Sidra continued, cutting him off from doing just that. "You might need my bow, and the Droka would be lost here on their own." The pair of runaways smiled at hearing the familiar word.
"The wall is big,"
said a wide-eyed Guan. Jaden looked to Spirion for help.
"We have come this far together,"
said the wizard. Jaden shook his head, exasperated, though in truth part of him was glad that they were coming. Sidra's bow especially could come in handy if any of the beasts had lingered near their fallen leader. Before he knew it, the gates of Mora, which they had only just entered, were closing behind them once again. It felt like failure to be leaving so soon, having accomplished nothing. If things went well, he told himself, they would be back before they knew it, bearing evidence of Dergmont's demise. After that, Garrod would have no choice but to listen to reason. If he still would not... It was not a long walk to the spot where the giant troll had disappeared, about 150 paces in all. The fog had thinned a little on its own. They could see about 20 paces as opposed to 10, and with any luck, the trolls would retreat all the way back to their camps and think twice about another attack. Sidra kept a close eye on the insubstantial swirling clouds, her bow at the ready with an arrow nocked. Zurith Pool also searched the fog, with one hand on the hilt of the gruesome double-bladed axe he wore at his belt, the preferred weapon of Easterners. It was said that one side of their axe was for chopping wood, and the other was for killing trolls. It was obvious from the grim look on Pool's face which side the gray-haired warrior thought he might need. Jaden kept a steady hand on the pommel of the strange scimitar he had retrieved from one of the attackers in Druania, wishing he had a balanced longsword, a backsword, or even a good rapier. Quandus rode on Maggie's back, looking as if his attention was not entirely with them, while the two Droka sat atop Zadosh. Spirion had supposedly relayed to the big warhorse that he was to be ready to ride at full gallop back to the city with the pair at a mere gesture. "Do you think Dergmont could really have survived the flames?" Jaden quietly asked Spirion as they walked.
"I do not see how. I am quite formidable with fire. Even with my power diminished as it is, the heat produced should have burned right through any living creature it came into contact with."
Jaden held up a hand, halting the party of 7 as they came to the spot where the earth was scorched. The corpses of 5 wood trolls and a giant mountain troll lay unmoving, still smoldering in places. The stench of burnt hair and flesh was nauseating. Zaria made a retching sound, but was able to gain control of her stomach, while Guan surveyed the scene with wide-eyed curiosity. "Is that him?" asked Cedra, pointing to the still figure of the mountain troll lying face down. Jaden held his breath as he approached the corpse. There was no dignified way to check the creature's identity, so he simply grabbed the body by the shoulder and, with great effort and a little help from Zurith, heaved it over. Crooked yellow teeth smiled up at them through a jaw that was mostly burned away. It was not Dergmont.
"Too small," coughed Poole, holding his nose against the stench. "And there is no sign of his helmet."
They searched the immediate area, but the body they were looking for was simply not there. "He lived long enough to drag himself away," said Cedra, studying the impressions in the damp soil intently. "The trail he left is obvious." She was right, of course. There were distinct signs of an enormous body being dragged across the ground with no consistent set of footprints nearby, only gigantic handprints at measured intervals. Dergmont had somehow survived, and apparently crawled away from the aftermath of the fiery attack, propelled only by the strength of his arms. "Let's keep moving," said Jaden. "The sooner we find him, the more likely he will be alone. If Garad wants a corpse, we will bring him one."
"Do not judge him too harshly, Highness," said Zurith. "You did not see what happened to Lord Torvin. Garad was watching from the walls when Dergmont caught his grandfather in front of the gates. The beast killed 10 men before he even reached the governor."
Zurith paused, reliving the unpleasant memory for a moment.
"He tore Torvin's limbs off and left them, then ran away with the torso over his shoulder, still partly alive, for all we know, though he could not have lasted long before bleeding to death."
Jaden tried to swallow the lump in his throat, but it would not go down. He had seen his father killed before his eyes, a vivid memory that Hysenthor had plucked from his brain and used to torture him on multiple occasions.
"Dergmont was riddled with arrows when he departed. We pursued him, but trolls can run like the wind, even when burdened, and this troll was faster than any I have ever seen. He led us into a little canyon, where we were ambushed by a few hundred wood trolls. They were waiting for us in the trees, with clubs at the ready. Waiting. We've never seen anything like that sort of cooperation from their kind. Never imagined they were even capable of it. We were taken completely by surprise. Of the 50 men who pursued Dergmont, 5 of us returned, including myself and Garad, who I hauled back unconscious, slung over the neck of my horse."
"I had no idea."
"You could not have known. I tell you this now so that you might understand him a little better. He may seem unreasonable, but he does what he thinks is right for the city, even if it is often against my counsel. Garad is a frightened young man with a mountain of responsibility on his shoulders, but he will not abandon his people. He will fight, even to the end. He is a man of duty, a man of Mora."
Into the trees the tracks led. They had gone no more than another 50 paces before a small clearing opened up amidst the oak and pine. In the center of the clearing lay a monstrous, burnt form. Flesh was missing from Dergmont in more than one place. His left side consisted mostly of exposed bones, with crisp chunks of meat clinging on here and there. The horned helm was miraculously intact, attached under the chin by what was left of its leather straps. Judging by the condition of the body, it was a wonder that the troll had managed to make it as far as he had. It was even more shocking when Dergmont stirred, then flopped over onto his back. One eye was completely gone, with nothing but an open socket gaping back into the head. The other eye was black, and appeared to have fused together with the surrounding skin. The hair on Jaden's arm stood straight out as an evil chuckle emitted from the deformed figure.
"The first,"
Quandus whispered from his mount.
"Darosh Moa Vegra Dergmont,"
boomed a deep, unearthly voice, as if in response to the old man's words. The sound originated from Dergmont, but the troll's mouth did not move. More disturbing still was that even though the brute obviously could not see, he appeared to be looking directly at Jaden. The party stood in shock, wondering how anything could survive such horrific damage. With a grunt, Dergmont jerked upright, onto his feet. More skeleton than troll, the creature lurched forward.
"This is no troll,"
Spirion hissed.
"Something unnatural dwells within."
The thing that had been Dergmont continued to shamble forward, spouting more of the strange tongue. Poole had said that it killed 10 men by itself, and Governor Deimos, who was a renowned warrior. It had also withstood Spirion's fire. Quandus's earlier words came back to him. "Only the head will suffice," the old man had said. The prophet had said. Jaden drew the scimitar. While not his weapon of choice under normal circumstances, the unbalanced curved blade was good for one thing: chopping. There was a quiet twang, and an arrow hissed through the air to bury itself in the monster's neck. The thing tilted its head almost as if in amusement, ignoring Sidra's arrow and bending down to pick up a thick tree limb. Zurith saw the danger and lashed out with his axe, severing the hand from the arm reaching for the limb. The reanimated troll corpse growled in frustration, and Jaden saw his chance. Clutching the hilt in both hands, he took a running leap toward the beast and raised the blade high over his head to bring it down on the back of its exposed neck with all the force he could muster. Quick as lightning, the monstrosity snatched up the limb with its remaining hand and swatted it up into Jaden's ribs with unfathomable speed. The blow sent him flying in a new direction to land awkwardly a few paces away. The sound of simultaneous impacts, the thwack of his sword passing through Dergmont's neck, combined with the crunch of his own ribs breaking, was sickening. He flailed on the ground, trying to suck in air that would not come, the wind in his lungs having been forcibly knocked out. When he finally did manage a single breath, it brought pain exploding into his side. He awkwardly tried to rise, but Sidra was suddenly there, pressing him gently back down. "Don't move," she said in a voice that sounded a little too calm. "You will only do more damage." From the corner of his eye he could see the headless remains of Dergmont lying motionless. Zurith Poole stood above the abomination, with his axe still at the ready, as though expecting the thing to rise again at any moment. It did not. They had succeeded. The creature that haunted Mora, that had kept her citizens locked away in fear, was no more. A coughing fit racked his body, and blood spewed from his mouth onto the damp leaves of the forest floor.
"Here, let me have a look."
Spirion placed his hands gently on the injured ribs and closed his eyes. Jaden braced himself for the familiar intrusion of the healing process, but a small tingling sensation was all he felt. Spirion opened his eyes. The pain had not diminished.
"How bad is it?"
he asked through gritted teeth. Spirion was slow to respond.
"You can tell me."
"It could be much, much worse. One of your ribs came dangerously close to puncturing a lung." "Only close?" Sidra inquired, still using that overly casual bedside manner physicians often used when they did not want to frighten a patient. "Where is the blood coming from? He spit up a lot of it. Are you positive a lung wasn't pierced?" Jaden could not help but be conscious of her close proximity to him, with one hand resting lightly on his arm and her long auburn curls so close to his face that he could smell them. Her overall scent was of sweat and earth, but not unpleasant. They could all do with a bath, he supposed. Then he blushed furiously as an image of her taking a bath entered his mind unbidden. "Stop it," he chided himself. "You almost died."
"Of course I'm positive, girl,"
the wizard grumbled in indignation. Searching for something from the nearby ground, he plucked up a small object covered in blood.
"I believe this is the cause of the internal bleeding."
It was a tooth. His tooth, to be precise. He felt inside his mouth with his finger. Sure enough, there was an empty socket toward the rear of his upper right jaw. He must have landed on the side of his face and jarred it loose. His cheek did feel swollen now that he examined it. It hardly even registered as pain, though, compared with the burning in his side. Sidra let her manner slip a little after seeing the tooth, breathing a sigh of relief. "Forgive me. I did not mean to question your expertise."
"The situation is still very serious," said the wizard sharply. "The rib bone is still at an awkward angle. If you were to bend the wrong way, or even make too sharp of a movement, it could still puncture it. With my current skill, I can do very little to help you. The body is a complex maze." I could juggle fireballs with the power it would take to set your ribs back in place correctly. As it stands, you will be many weeks in bed, and the bone will never heal properly if left on its own. You need a mender."
Menders were the fabled healers of Alnorda, who used a very specific type of magic to fix ailments of the body and mind. Unfortunately, the only menders Jaden knew of were in Eridan. His childhood friend, Matthias, had been accepted into the University of Internal Mending to learn the specialized craft, and was heralded as having the greatest potential of any mender in a generation. The last time Jaden had seen him had been the day the shaggy blonde-haired boy had left to begin his training, secluding himself away from the outside world. He prayed that his friend was somehow still alive and well. Eridan was a world away from the little clearing in the Crystal Woods, but spending weeks in bed was simply not an option. He was going to have to tough it out for a while. "It will be okay. Just help me stand." Even Quandus shook himself out of his own thoughts and raised an eyebrow at that.
"Do not be ridiculous," said Spirion. "We will make you a litter and take you back to Mora, where you can rest."
"I can rest after I confront Garad, which I must do before he has time to recover from the sight of Durgmont," Jaden countered. "I promise you I will move as carefully as I can until then, and spend ample time in bed as soon as we find one. Just help me up for now, please." A twig snapped as something moved in the trees, followed by a series of guttural grunts. No one breathed. A moment later, a wood troll materialized out of the fog. The troll blinked in surprise at seeing them, opening its mouth to shout. An arrow seemed to appear out of nowhere, the green fletching protruding from the front of the creature's throat. Blood ran down from its open mouth, mingling with the blood that was already leaking from the point of entry, and the troll dropped quietly to the ground. Cedra had already notched another arrow and was watching the surrounding shadows. The look on her face made it appear as if she almost wanted another of the monsters to come out of the fog. They had to move, and there was no time to construct a litter. Gathering his strength, Jaden pushed himself to his feet. A small grunt was the only sound that escaped, though he broke into a sweat from the pain. "Let's move," he said, taking his first step forward. The shifting of his broken rib bones sent painful jolts shooting through him, but he refused to show any outward signs. To stop now might mean more trolls, and they could bring much worse than pain. Broken ribs were always preferable to a crushed skull.
"I will never again question the toughness of Northerners,"
said Zurith Poole in admiration as he hefted Durgmont's head over his shoulder, holding it by one of the horns on the intimidating helmet that had still somehow remained attached. Black blood oozed from the open neck, streaming down the back of his wool cloak. Spirion smacked his lips with distaste.
"No help for that,"
said Poole, noticing the wizard's reaction.
"It's nothing a good wash won't take care of. I'd bathe in the beast's blood if it would bring Torvin back. A quick death was more than it deserved."
There were no further troll sightings as they made their way back to the city. Jaden's mood had worsened, though, his jaw clenched in a dark scowl. There was so much yet to do, and now he would be forced to do a good portion of it lying down. Every pain-filled step reminded him that Garad had denied him his help. Even the groan of the gates as they opened for the little party, a sound that should have given him relief, served only to aggravate him further. He was looking forward to telling the young man exactly what he thought of his behavior. There was no jubilant crowd waiting to meet them in the courtyard, but one of the guards, astounded by the bloody trophy, offered to run ahead and inform Garad of their success. Jaden ordered him not to, a command backed by a nod from Poole, and asked where Mora's leader by proxy could be found. Apparently, Garad had called a meeting of his advisors in a supposed attempt to generate new engineering ideas to strengthen the front gates against further troll attacks. As they made their way to the inner city, citizens did begin to cluster around them. The people stared in wonder at the little party and at the massive head slung over Poole's shoulder. Jaden received more than his share of stares as well. He had not noticed before, but blood had thoroughly soaked the front of his fancy new white shirt, which was already completely ruined. Some of it was his and some of it Durgmont's. There were rips and dirt stains as well, but most of it was blood. Blood also stained the corners of his mouth and his neck. With the grimace on his face, he must look like he had come to wage war. He was not entirely sure that he had not. By the time they reached the squat stone keep at the rear of the city, the crowd had expanded until the street behind them was completely full. He heard his name run through the ranks of the drably dressed people, along with his father's. Apparently, word of Urian's death had spread quickly. Some of them looked at him with sympathy, some with hopeful smiles, and a few with fear. The simply carved oak doors were shut and barred. Zurith could sense that Jaden was in no mood to wait, not to mention he was supposed to be limiting his movements, so he quickly stepped forward.
"Allow me, Highness."
The aging soldier banged on the thick wood 3 times with his free hand. "Who goes there?" demanded a voice from inside. "Jaden Ryanthorn, heir to the throne of Crysin." Nothing happened. Zurith Poole cleared his throat, loudly.
"Open the door, Ansel,"
he said in a tone that brooked no disobedience. "Yes, sir," replied the voice, not nearly as confident as before. After a moment, the door on the right swung silently inward. A young man in chainmail armor, with a tabard bearing the tree and stag of the Deimos family, emerged. His eyes widened at the sight of them with their grisly trophy. The young man quickly knelt in front of Jaden. "How may I serve you, my lord?" "I want to see Garad. Now." "Yes, my lord, of course, my lord," the guard stuttered as he backed away, bowing. Jaden turned to survey the faces of the people. He wanted to comfort them, to help them, to let them know that things would be set right, but at that moment he could not even bring himself to smile. All he could think about was how Garad had allowed the 7 of them to ride out through the gates without a proper escort. It was a lucky thing that none of them had been killed. He wanted to throttle the young man.
"Garad is not a bad man, my liege,"
said Poole, as if reading his thoughts.
"He deserves to be put in his place, but I swear to you that he is good for the East."
"Thank you, Zurith," replied Jaden with what little warmth he could muster. "You have done so much for Crysin under my father, and she will continue to need you in the hard days ahead. I will need you, and I will do everything in my power to see that your service does not go unrewarded."
"I do not serve for reward, Highness."
"I know. That is one more reason you deserve to be rewarded." Crysin no longer had knights, like the neighboring kingdom of North Calas, or Jaden would have immediately added the man to their ranks for his help. He promised himself that he would find some sort of suitable reward once the kingdom was back under control of the crown. A short time later, the door reopened, and Garad stepped out to meet them, a pikeman to either side. "I would know the cause of this interruption," he began, with a glare for Jaden. "I was in the middle of crucial deliberations pertaining to the protection of—" Zurith unlimbered the massive troll head from his back and plopped it down at Garad's feet, cutting him off in mid-sentence. The young man's eyes bulged. "He was dead. He was actually dead." "Not when we found him," replied Jaden, a dangerous tone to his voice that Garad seemed to completely miss as he continued to stare dumbfounded at the gruesome head. "I don't know what to say." Zurith Poole snorted.
"You could start by announcing to these good citizens of our beloved city that their rightful prince, soon to be king, has just slain the enemy who took their governor from them, and has kept us trembling behind our city walls for the past 6 months.
If his current disposition had not been so sour, and his ribs so sore, Jaden might have hugged the man. He had found a strong ally in the veteran soldier indeed. Garad blinked, staring at the gathered crowd as if just now noticing that they were there. He took a deep breath to gather his composure, and looked Jaden squarely in the eye. "This changes nothing," he said. "Another will spring up in his place, and we will still need all of our strength to defend our people." He quickly stepped forward and waved his hands in the air before Jaden could reply. "Good people," he shouted, "I implore that you hear my words. From the ashes of the besieged north, the Prince of Crysin, Jaden Ryanthorn, has come to us in this time of need." The cheers that rang out were music to Jaden's ears. This was more like the welcome he had imagined in coming to Mora. He held up an arm to acknowledge everyone who had gathered. It was pleasing to note that even though Garad tried to quiet the crowd and continue over the noise, it was some time before the din began to subside. These people had been in sore need of good news. Jaden's smile did not come easy, but he did manage one at last. Garad, fuming with impatience, finally managed to bring the noise down to a level that he could shout over. "The Troll King is dead." More cheers, more waiting for a break in the uproar. "Please remain within the walls. The trolls are still in the wood, and we must be ever vigilant." Garad turned his back to the crowd and whispered something to one of his guards, who quickly bowed and disappeared into the keep, leaving Jaden to wonder what the young man was playing at. He was not one for overblown speeches himself, but Garad's words were hardly sufficient to announce the arrival of their future king, who many had surely presumed dead after the fall of Eredin. He had not even mentioned that it was Jaden who slew Dergmont, with a little help from Sidra and Zurith Pool, of course. It was obvious that the people needed hope, and instead he ended the brief pronouncement by giving them more fear. By the way the citizens were milling around in confusion, Jaden guessed that the majority had nowhere to go. How was that possible? "Why are there so many people in the streets?" he asked Poole quietly. "The city appears to be bursting at the seams."
"It is. Garad sent runners to all of the nearby villages and to anyone who had a home in the woods when the trolls first appeared, ordering that everyone come to the safety of Mora's walls."
That made some sense, now that Jaden had come face to face with Dergmont. But why did he get the feeling that there were no plans being formulated which would enable them to go back to their homes any time soon? He measured the faces of his companions to see if they were as incredulous as he was. The Droka were huddled together nervously, clearly not used to being in the company of so many humans. Spirion was eyeing Garad with cool detachment, as if deciding whether it was worth the trouble to burn the man to a crisp, and Sidra returned his glance, concern about his health evident on her face. Quandus had not bothered to dismount, but still sat atop Spirion's mare, staring straight ahead as he had most of the day, muttering. The old man was not behaving like himself. For one thing, he had not made a single negative remark for hours. Now he was sweating profusely and beginning to shake. There was something wrong with his eyes. They appeared a solid, cloudy blue, as if the crystalline blue in his irises had bled into the whites of his eye and become diluted. Sidra followed Jaden's gaze to her grandfather and frowned at what she saw. Jaden was vaguely aware of Garad's voice, arguing with Poole in the background, as Quandus straightened and dismounted. The prophet walked directly into the center of the crowd, who parted for him, until he stood in a clear circle among the onlookers. Convulsions suddenly racked him, as all eyes turned in his direction. His clothing and hair moved as if caught in a stiff wind, but the air was still. The throng moved away, pressing together as tightly as they could to avoid him. The convulsions stopped as suddenly as they had begun, and when he looked up, his eyes had become completely white. He spoke in the same commanding tone that he had used the last time he had spoken what seemed to be prophecy. But this time the old man's voice was not merely forceful. It rang through the streets of Mora like a pronouncement of doom.
"From far beyond this living realm they come, the scouts who hunt their prey before the flood. The traitor, knowing not what he has done, his ill-begotten power summons them. Beware, all children of the kindly north, for long have they endeavoured toward this plan. Disunity does draw our old foes forth, to tear asunder all the world of man."
Quandus raised his arm toward Garad then, his bony finger crooked accusingly. The grandson of Torvin Deimos, beloved governor of the East, looked very much like he wished to find the nearest suitable rock to hide behind.
"Now must alliances remain intact, and he who wields the fire be restored, before that darkest day when they attack a mortal world divided nevermore. Let rise anointed blood of this thy land, who we did long ago rely upon, to hold all elements within thy hand, and meet the hateful enemy at dawn."
And then the old man's body stiffened, before going completely limp. Sidra reached her grandfather just before he hit the pavestones, catching him, cradling his head gently in front of the speechless people of Mora. As if not to be outdone, Spirion cleared his throat in the sudden silence.
"Hear me,"
shouted the wizard in a voice to rival Quandus's. A few thousand pairs of unblinking eyes now turned to him.
"The prophet has spoken. Heed his words. Return to your farms. Return to your homes. Sharpen your axes and your plows against the struggle to come. The thoughts wage war, and we are the weapons of their judgment. Farmers, tend your herds and bring in your crops, that you may support this land. Fisherfolk, tend to your nets, that you may feed this land. Crysin has been dealt a mighty blow, but soon shall come the time for us to strike back."
He raised his hands dramatically, and Dergmont's head floated up in mid-air to face the people.
"The Troll King has been slayed by the hand of Orion Thorn, the blood of this land. Let the forces of the Jealous Ones beyond the world of man know fear, for Crysin is strong. The East is strong. Do not forget your place. You are the keepers of the forest, the unbroken shield that protects the kingdom from the wild. These walls of stone are but fragile monuments to your might, flimsy reminders of the true strength that boldly dares reside in the shadow of the crystal mountains. And you are not alone."
Taking hold of Jaden's arm, he raised it up like the champion of a tournament.
"Behold, the heir of fire has returned."